All right, welcome everybody to the OAG One Accord the Guild live stream. Thank you for joining us. And tonight we're going to be taking a look at some special projects that we have been working on. If you are not part of the guild, head on over to oneaccordtheguild.com and you can join our Discord and check out the other cool stuff that we're doing. And yeah, now I'm going to hand it over to Miss Complete Links.
All right, welcome everybody. Welcome to Noah's Ark. And maybe you joined us back in the day when we built this gigantic project, the real life recreation to scale of Noah's Ark. And we ended that time inside the Ark just before the flood. And we have to continue that story from where we left off. So let us now go into the Ark and finish the story. All right, let's cut to me. And we're joined today. We got face sampling here behind me. We got complete links. We got Andy Rue you just saw. And let's get this show on the road. All right, everybody, into the Ark. It is going to rain. And actually, Faith, can you queue up the weather? Let's get some experience going. There we go. So the rain started. The floods came up. And hope everybody's in the Ark.
Ooh, it's leaking a little bit.
Yeah, who built this thing? Is leaking. Is everybody inside? All right, we got Andrew, we got complete. Oh, we're missing Faith. Hope he made it.
Well,
that's what happened. There was a time you could get in, and then there was a time when you couldn't. Just as in Noah's Ark. But we're going to go down to the belly of the boat, to where we have built a surprise. So this is the bottom, the stern of the boat. Noah's Ark. Where there's probably food. The chickens weren't food. What a long boat. It was at least a football field long. Let's all stand right here. Oh, did we lose you, Andy? Andy Roo.
way downtown.
We're down here. Now where's Faith? Let's make him come here. Boom.
I'm coming.
All aboard. And right, would someone like to hit that note block? Give it a nice little right click tap.
Nope, I guess he's zoned out.
All right, I can do it. And when it stops, you gotta run. Run. All right, welcome to the Underground Flood Museum. And actually, we could probably end the flood. What's that? Weather. Done. Kind of weird how it leaks even when you're 20 feet underground.
Yeah.
All right, so this is a little museum where we're adding information that proves or interprets the scientific information we have today as proof of the flood. So we have recreated a little bit of the pre-flood environment before us, and we can see there's some ocean, just a small little amount of ocean. We got the grass. And then we have a mountain area. And it probably was a bit like what we have today, right? I mean, hills, plains, and water. And what is the lowest point that you guys notice here? Andrew, what would you say is like the lowest point elevation wise in this little recreation?
Probably the water.
Yeah. Oh, you're exactly right. The water was probably the lowest point. And just like it is today, our lakes, our rivers tend to be, on average, lower than the ground. Same thing with the ocean. Ocean tends to be lower. So just hold that thought, and we're going to return to it. Why is that important? And next, we're going to see that the ground is... Ooh, there we go. The ground is also not level, but the ground goes higher and higher. And there's some animals that, let's say, might be able to do better running up higher points of ground than other animals. And what animals might be the best at getting really high up really fast?
Goats.
Yeah, goats would be a good example. What else?
All the fast, nimble little animals.
Yeah, fast little ones. And what about these?
And the climbing ones.
And interestingly, we'll look at the fossil layers. The top layer, the Pentatene layer, I mispronounced it. At the top, they find horses. And if we look at the fossil layer, what do we consider the earliest creatures and the first ones that appear in terms of ancient time? If you think the layers represent time.
Yeah, the invertebrates and the simple.
Yeah, and the sea creatures, even though they might have been just lower elevation. So if we think about even a world today and where we would, if everything became instantly frozen in place, we would get pretty much the same picture that we find in the fossil record. And of course, there's probably going to be some distortion because if there was like rising waters, those horses, well, they're already high up. They're already in a good place. But they wouldn't be running towards the water. They'll be running away from it. They'll be running towards higher ground. And if we come over here to this little display built by Annie, it's amazing. This kind of shows exactly what we see, right? Where we have the dinosaurs, the really large animals that they still may have been fast, but they may have been outrun by the horses who were more nimble, can get up steeper points. They're way up at the top. And then we have dinosaurs. And then at the very bottom, we have the ancient sea life, like the ancient corals, ancient sea worms. And then we also find at lower levels a lot of plant life. We find the trees down there, grasses, things like that. And we know plants aren't able to just pick up their feet and walk, right? But what's interesting is trees do float. And we've found after Mount St. Helens that they also float vertically. And we'll take a look at that in a moment. So one thing I want to share too is we have a nice little write-up about the Cambrian Explosion. And this is one of the many points of proof that people talk about there is a flood, because we look in a fossil record and all of a sudden, bam, there's a whole bunch of almost all the creatures we have today existing there at that time in this Cambrian layer, especially all creatures that have a vertebrae or vertically symmetrical. So all vertebrates and reptiles and mammals show up at this time. Just all of a sudden, boom, all of them in their whole complete form are there. And some other interesting points. There's no evidence of vertebrates or invertebrates below the Cambrian layers. And then many creatures found in the Cambrian layers have counterparts alive today. These living fossils do not reflect any evolutionary changes when you compare them to their fossilized ancestors. Many living fossils also mysteriously disappear from the rock layers above the Cambrian layer. But then they're still alive today. We don't find them in other intermediary layers above the Cambrian. And what's also amazing, Cambrian layer fossils are well preserved. We find soft body creatures in them, like worms. We find their bodies still largely intact. And what's amazing, you can take dinosaur bones from supposedly these million years back, dissolve them in acid, and we find soft tissues. And most people agree soft tissues should only last a few thousand years. You're not expected to last the millions and millions of years a lot of people are claiming. So,
right. Yeah, even lasting 10,000 years is unheard of.
Yeah. So here's an amazing quote. The incredible preservation of soft tissue impressions combined with an explosion of animal life in virtually every conceivable body plan with no evolutionary precursors utterly defies all naturalistic explanations, as does the fact that the fossils from these rock layers contain soft tissues. The presence of actual undecayed tissues in fossils found at virtually every layer of the geologic column completely undermines the paradigm or evolution's deep time paradigm. And then here we could see the address here. You can look this up, www.icr.org. They have some great write-ups there. And there's plenty of different evidence that we'll over time fill out here. We do have a Bible verse, though. Maybe, Andrew, you'd like to read that?
Sure.
2 Peter 3:3-6.
Let's see. Can we get that up on screen? There we go. 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 3. Knowing this first, that in the last days mockers shall come with mockery, walking after their own lusts, and saying, where is the promise of his coming? For from the day that the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of the creation. For this they willfully forget that there were heavens from of old, and an earth compacted out of the water and amidst the water by the word of God, by which means the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished.
Nice. So, kind of wordy, but what's your takeaway from this verse and how it relates to what we're talking about today?
Well, even people in the New Testament times believed that there was a flood and that it was a real thing, and that if we're going to take the New Testament as a historical document and, as the Christian faith as part of our beliefs, then we're also going to take the flood to be a real thing.
And to me, what's also interesting is it's also, so yeah, I agree. There's a historical evidence that people, even shortly after Jesus' time, his disciples, people closest to him, believed there was a flood. And then was there a prediction then about our time, these last days?
Let's go back, because I think I might have missed it. Well, basically that people would be saying the same thing that Noah's, that the people were saying about Noah in his day, like, oh, it's not going to rain. It's, this stuff isn't going to be happening. Why are you doing this? And then the same thing is happening today, where it's like, well, this isn't real. People are mocking God and doing there and not paying attention to what God has for them.
It's so interesting how Peter says they willfully forget that the heavens from of old and earth compacted out of the water in the midst of the water. So basically, they forget that God basically created the earth. They deny there's creation, and they also deny the world that it was overflowed with water. So they deny there's creation, denying that there's water, and he predicted that these people were going to come from way back in the day. So, I mean, to me, and especially back then, we're dealing with times where people believed in gods and pantheons. Even the pagans believed that there was some sort of creation of the gods. To predict that people would come denying there was a flood, denying there was creation by God, I think, to me, is a profound prediction. And then, saying that there'll be mockers saying, where's Jesus is coming, because all things continue as they were. Like, the whole premise of evolution is what we see now are processes that always existed, and you just assume these processes existed for millions of years.
Yeah. Isn't that called uniformitarianism?
Sounds right to me.
Yeah.
There is a word for it. So we can head on down now to another part of the exhibit. And here we have two sets of cutouts, let's say, from the geological column. From, if we took the earth, dug down, and just took a slice of it. One is what we actually see, and one is what you would probably expect to see under an evolutionary millions of years model. What do you guys spot as differences between them?
The layers are a lot more even in this one over here. Well, this one.
Yeah, the one we actually see in real life.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. To me, that is huge. I just love driving around, especially like New Jersey or even California. We have all sorts of different places where you can just see these straight lines. And if they're not straight, it's because, there's some upthrust, some like earthquakes push some parts of the ground up. And so that's why here I don't have it 100% straight the whole way across. But you could see that at one time they were perfectly flat.
Can you explain that one piece that's going up and down that's very vertical?
So this vertical line we see there, let's say that is a petrified tree. And somehow this tree manages to cross millions and millions and millions of years of layers. That just, how would you explain that from an evolutionary model where that tree should have decayed right away? That tree should have only existed in one of those layers, and yet here we see it spanning millions of years.
Yeah, that doesn't really make sense to me.
No. And we find this all over. And we also find bones that span multiple layers. Or we find a body, when it decays, it puts out different fluids and things. And those fluids, let's say, seep through into other layers. Which...
that wouldn't have happened over millions of years.
Yeah, exactly. There's only one explanation for all of this, which is all these layers are deposited in underwater rapidly. And so you're getting, and so it's like dirt will get pushed down and then it will settle out layer after layer as maybe a tsunami wave comes through each time. And as it settles, you also get, as we represent here, you get larger, bigger particles down at the bottom. And as you work your way up, the particles get finer and finer. And this is what happens as sand, as dirt settles out in water. The big particles land first, gravity pulls them down, and then the lighter stuff might float a little bit in the water and then slowly settle out. This is what we see. And water explains that. A flood explains it. And we also, going back to the flat layers, what's interesting about that too is there's no wear and tear in between them. It's just beautifully flat between them. Whereas if we had, under the assumed model, you would have, with evolution, you would have tons of wear and tear, decay, rivers would sweep by, push things around, wind would blow, like everything's going to be worn out. So it'd be chaos.
So question then, basically what you're saying is that the only way that those layers could have formed is that if there was large amounts of water and things could like separate. Like I made some apple juice, like homemade apple juice this week, and I let the container in the fridge, and eventually like the particles start to separate and go to the bottom, and then the clear liquid stays on top. So
that's a great question. And maybe some of the layers are explained by that, where the lighter stuff floats and then the heavier materials will sink. And some geologists I've heard, what they say though is, you have all the mountains being submerged. The Bible says that. And maybe, I wonder if I have the verse in here. Oh yeah, we do. Maybe you'd like to read the verse over here.
I'm coming. All right, what do we got here? Genesis chapter 7. In the 600th year of Noah's life, on the 17th day of the second month, on that day, all the springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens were opened, and rain fell on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. For 40 days the flood kept coming on the earth, and as the waters increased, they lifted the ark high above the earth. The waters rose and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the surface of the water. They rose greatly on the earth, and all the high mountains under the entire heavens were covered. The waters rose and covered the mountains to a depth of more than 15 cubits. Every living thing that moved on the land perished: birds, livestock, wild animals, all the creatures that swarm over the earth, and all mankind. Everything on dry land that had the breath of life in its nostrils died. Every living thing on the face of the earth was wiped out. People and animals and the creatures that moved along the ground and the birds were wiped from the earth. Only Noah was left with him in the ark. The waters flooded the earth for 150 days. 150 days.
Yeah. So the whole earth is submerged, even the mountains. Was there that verse where it talked about it past the mountains? Maybe that's the part where it talks about it receding. But even the mountains are under the water. And what happens is, if you were to build a big mountain or, a pile of dirt and then submerge that whole thing underwater, eventually it's going to destabilize and it's going to start falling, and the particles are going to just start layering out along the bottom. And each one of those, as it keeps falling apart and eroding, is going to create layers around it. And this phenomena then would seem to explain why some of the layers we find, let's say at the Grand Canyon, are different than layers you might find in Africa or Russia. There's different. Not all the layers are found everywhere around the world. And it makes sense then because you're just having different mountains, different terrain eroding under the flood.
It would also make sense if there weren't really the types of mountains today back before the flood, because that would make more sense. Like if everything was more flat, then there would be like greater coverage, everything being covered underwater. And then with everything kind of sliding around, then you would have mountains forming that weren't there before.
Yeah, and definitely makes sense, like with so much water and so much earth changing, that then with the tectonic plates moving around and slipping around and all that, yeah, you'll get a lot more up thrust and down thrust. And probably God, maybe he raised the continental shelves or lowered them during the flood, raise them up again. So creating new mountains, new terrain. It's a very different earth now than it was back then. And yeah, what's interesting too is that, in fact, rain never existed before the flood. That's something that we are told, basically, or the Bible indicates there was no rain before the flood. So when we make assumptions that, there probably is always erosion, always rain, always wind, always these things we have today, that isn't necessarily true. And the atmosphere was very different. So when it comes to like radiocarbon dating and things like that, that doesn't even really work out well, because radiocarbons seem to increase at really rapid rates shortly after the flood. And they find caves where they look at, let's say, the oldest giant sloth dung in the cave, and it might not have any radiocarbon in it, or might have a lot of radiocarbon, I forget the way it goes. But then as the same sloths keep going back into the cave and making more poop, the way you date their newer poop actually dates older than the older poop. That's below the newer poop.
Poop, poop, poop.
That's really weird.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it shows you radiocarbon is not very accurate. People pull up brand new magma. Like they go find lava flows that we know that occurred, let's say, back in the 80s or 90s. They take a sample and send it to people to date, and it comes out millions of years old. There's a problem with the method. So science is not the science we think it is. There's still a lot of guessing and interpretation to it. There's a lot of room for human error still. So
yeah,
always have to be using our brain and thinking of alternative possibilities.
Something I was looking into was how radioactivity probably didn't exist in the pre-flood world.
Yeah.
It was created just by all this commotion going on with, rocks heaving against each other at high speeds and just everything that was going on. And that's part of why people probably get older and die faster.
Yeah. And we have like a third the atmosphere that we probably had before the flood. The flood was probably a really thick atmosphere, blocked a lot of sunlight, also probably trapped in a lot of heat, so temperatures overall were more even. So
yeah, so
amazing.
We wouldn't have snow?
No, there probably wasn't.
No snow?
No snow days.
I can't say I would miss that 100%.
Yeah, so when people say like, "Oh, why did God make the world like this?" It's kind of like, well, he didn't really make the world like this. This is just kind of the result of an accident. You wouldn't blame. You wouldn't look at a car that's in an accident and say, "Why did the manufacturers make the car like this?" Well, it's because it's after the accident.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Very good point. Yeah, and in fact, the Bible, I think he more or less describes how God repeatedly cursed the ground after the flood. I mean, Adam and Eve sinned, and then God tells Adam, the ground is going to be cursed now because of your sin. And then after Cain murdered Abel, God says the ground is now cursed. And then the flood is sort of like this gigantic, massive third curse that just ripped the whole land apart, changed it massively. And yeah, you're right. That's not even close to God's original plan. And I like what you said, though, about radioactivity, because I've heard it, too, where some people speculate that God used radioactivity, basically these nuclear reactors, to create the fountains of the earth. That they just superheated, created lots of boiling water, and then shot up from the bottom of the earth. And it would be consistent with how we do have lots of uranium and these deposits down deep. And I even read about there's this natural nuclear reactor in Siberia, I think it is, where it fills up with water and then it overheats the water shoots out, and then the reactor calms down a little bit and then refills and just keeps cycling. Yeah, that's right. Huh. You're supposed to be drowning.
All right, who does the best? Do the Minecraft.
Oh, I gotta hear him. Yeah.
So we talked about the vertical wood. So also in this room, we're showing how what happens is bark often gets stripped off of the trees from the blast, from being pushed around, and then the logs themselves just end up standing vertically. And then over time, maybe silt, sand stuff builds up around the logs. They will get petrified and solidified vertically in place. So it's interesting.
How logs will just naturally float like that. They don't have to. I mean, if you strip them and there's like a whole bunch of them next to each other.
Exactly. So it's, yeah, and most of the petrified wood we find is totally stripped of bark. And then where do we find the bark, though? We find layers and layers of coal. And the coal has lots of strip bark, among other many interesting things. So it's all just consistent with this giant flood that rapidly buried everything. Oh, and there's one more thing that I missed when we were out talking about the layers. There is one layer that covers just about the entire Earth. And it mentioned we didn't have all the layers everywhere. Some are missing. But there's one that's pretty universal, and that is the Cretaceous Layer. And Cretaceous is Latin for chalk. And there is this chalky layer that goes everywhere. And it's interesting. The chalk is from microscopic water organisms like algae that then produce this calcium, sodium bicarbonate substance, and it breaks down into chalk, and this is what we find everywhere. And this is exactly what you expect if you had a giant flood, the water was really warm, and there's lots of dead creatures and animals in there just changing the nature of the water, and these microorganisms will just grow crazy, and then we get massive layers of that chalk as the waters recede.
We should do an ice age, an ice age one too, because when you take a look at how the supposed ice age was caused, from what I've seen, it's basically because you've got this water shooting up in the atmosphere, and it's somewhat going out into space or in the thinner upper atmosphere, and it's being super cold and then falling back to Earth, and then essentially instantaneously freezing everything in its path. Mm-hmm. And that's how you find tropical animals frozen in ice, and like entire rivers of fish frozen in place, like they were just frozen in time. So lots of other ways that it affects, and we just don't really explore all the avenues sometimes of how a flood could have affected the entire world.
Yeah, the ice age is definitely one of those things I haven't fully wrapped my head around. I've heard one guy that I've learned a lot of the flood stuff from. I think he speculates there was this giant, almost like a hurricane that would have come about during the flood because of such superheated water and just all the turbulence and stuff going on. And with that hurricane infecting things, he thinks that would have caused the giant ice age around America and Europe. But yeah, that's something I definitely want to learn more about at some point. everything makes sense from the Bible perspective that we actually see and observe. It's just the disagreement between evolutionists and creationists is a matter of interpretation. It's not a matter of what we actually see.
Yeah.
Hey, Roque, are you there?
Oh, yeah. I just AFK.
Look like you're here to guide us to the next part.
Yeah. This is
And
where it gets to the... Wait, I'm confused now.
And actually, this room is still incomplete. We want to share some point all the different civilizations that have flood stories, which is really interesting. I mean, everybody from the ancient Mesopotamians to, I believe, the Chinese to Native Americans, they all have flood stories. And so some people say, well, let's write that off then and say that the Bible story is wrong and they're just ripping off these stories from the pagan cultures. But another reasonable interpretation is there really was a gigantic flood and all these ancient societies passed on this story and the Bible's account is true.
Yeah. Gilgamesh.
Exactly. Probably a lot more true to Gilgamesh than we realize.
Yeah.
Not that everything there is accurate in it.
Right, yeah, it's not that. The world is on the backs of turtles or whatever.
I think the door to this thing is broken or something.
We could get out. We just have to read the book.
Oh, is that how you do it? Okay. No.
What are you doing up here?
We got some bookage to read. Would you like to read first, Andrew? Or Roque?
No. I guess I could read it.
Yeah, you can get it.
How far do I read?
Yeah, feel free to read the whole thing.
Okay. And it came to pass at the end of the 40 days that Noah opened the window of the ark which he had made, and he sent forth a raven, and it went forth to and fro until the waters were dried up from off the earth. And he sent forth a dove from him to see if the waters were abated from off the face of the ground. But the dove found no rest for the sole of her foot, and she returned unto him to the ark. For the waters were on the face of the whole earth, and he put forth his hand and took her and brought her in unto him into the ark. And verse 10, okay. That's verse 10. And he strayed, and he stayed yet other 7 days. And again he sent forth the dove out of the ark, and the dove came into him at eventide, and lo, in her mouth an olive leaf plucked off. So Noah knew that the waters were abated from off the earth, and he stayed yet other 7 days and sent forth the dove, and she returned not again unto him any more. And it came to pass in the 601st year, in the first month, the first day of the month, the waters were dried up from off the earth, and Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked, and behold, the face of the ground was dried. And in the second month, on the 7th and 20th day of the month, was the earth dry.
So Noah was 600 years old when it started to rain, and I think he's basically 601 by the time it ends. That's a long flood. So
now the door opens.
Yeah, the door opened. We can get out of this.
Ta-da.
And we enter new land. And it's fortunate it's a destroyed, devastated land. Less trees. Can you imagine what it would have been like to just walk out for that first time? I mean, here, this flood has now been around for a little bit. Or, sorry, the Ark has been resting on Ararat for a little bit. So, grass has finally grown back. Maybe waters would have lingered around in deeper areas for a long time. Probably would have been a lot of reminders of the flood. I wonder what it would have been like to be Noah. Actually, we know he got depressed, right?
He got extremely depressed, and I've always thought that he must have actually suffered some like survivor guilt, kind of like soldiers do sometimes. And in that survivor guilt, he did what's recorded in Genesis, and it must have been eating away at him for some time, because I mean he had to grow grapes, and then let it, become wine, which takes a while. It doesn't just happen, overnight. Mm-hmm. And I think he must have really just had a lot of, just PTSD, survivor guilt, whatever you want to call it, trying to deal with, the memories of before.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And that's exactly, I think, what happened. And we'll trace that story in just a moment. But we're told that soon after Noah climbed out of the ark, and all the animals come out, he did a special act for God. And let's check out this part of the story. Andrew, would you like to read the next text?
Sure, let me get over here. Ooh, hippity hop. Somebody load me up. Oh, I'm standing on the promises. Genesis 8, verses 20 through 22. And Noah builded an altar unto Jehovah, and took of every clean beast, and of every clean bird, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And Jehovah smelled the sweet savor, and Jehovah said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground any more for man's sake, for that the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I again smite any more everything living, as I have done. While the earth remaineth, seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease.
I'm actually finding I can sacrifice sheep on this. And then he probably sacrificed cows on it too, right? Because it said all the clean animals.
Right.
No pig. All right, get back in there. Okay, that cow can live.
It's an escape cow.
Escape cow.
Escape cow? Well, they just all seem to be escaping now.
Yeah. Cows don't sacrifice so easily.
Yeah.
They're like, no!
Get out of the way.
Let me live!
All right. All right, Genesis 9, start at verse 8. And God spoke to Noah and to his sons with him, saying, And behold, I will establish my covenant with you, and with your seed after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the cattle, and every beast of the earth with you, of all that go out of the ark, every beast of the earth, and I will establish my covenant with you. Neither shall all flesh be cut off any more by the waters of the flood. Neither shall there be any more be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, "This is the token of the covenant which I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for perpetual generations. I do set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be for a token of a covenant between me and the earth. And it shall come to pass when I bring a cloud over the earth that the bow shall be seen in the cloud, and I will remember my covenant, which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh, and the waters shall no more become a flood to destroy all the flesh. And the bow shall be in the cloud, and I will look upon it, that I may remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is upon the earth. And God said unto Noah, This is the token of the covenant which I have established between me and all the flesh that is upon the earth. And we look, and behold, the bow of God that we call the rainbow. So it is interesting, right, that every time it rains and the sun is just right, that the rainbow presents itself. And it's supposed to be that reminder of mercy and grace of God, that he'll never bring about at least destruction by floodwaters ever again. You guys are so solemn. What thoughts do you have?
I was just concentrating on where my camera angle was. Nothing profound.
Got a nice hero shot of me in there. Look at that. It looks like I'm contemplating.
Yeah. We screen captured that. That egg, though.
It's a horse egg.
What
my eggs.
the rainbow looks like in the different shaders that I have. So I'm gonna change my shaders and check it. I hear a cow moving.
My draw distance isn't high enough.
Oh, weird. The draw distance in this filter is totally different.
Yeah, that's the downside of those filters, is they generally don't have good render distance.
The one is really good, though. The one that I have is really good.
All right. Well, did we want to go?
Oh, that does look pretty.
The other part of this? Continue?
So we can, I think, yeah, we just got a little bit more to show. We got a lot more surprises we've been working on. We got more reveals in upcoming weeks, but let's close out this post-flood world a little bit more. And let's go pay Noah a little visit. Very likely he didn't move too far from the Ark. And some people speculate that he would have used the wood from the Ark to actually build his house. And thus think we shouldn't expect to be able to find the Ark. And we got the little vineyard Noah made. Made some grape juice, fermented grape juice, got drunk, had some not so pretty things happen. Yeah. But yeah, as we were talking about, it makes sense he would have been uber depressed, like really, really sad, having been the survivor, just with his family and everybody else dying. Maybe he had lots of friends that he lost in the flood. He was probably a very loving guy.
I know you've talked about it, like when we've all just been hanging out together before, but talk a little bit about who helped build the Ark, and then those are some of the people that were gone naturally, like before the flood happened.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
And, go ahead.
So yeah, when he started building, he probably was helped by his grandfather Methuselah, who his name means when he dies, it shall come. So the year that Methuselah died, sure enough, that's when the flood came. And I'm sure we get the news, right, when the oldest living person passes away. That recently happened for us. She was 122 years old, and I think passed away a month or two ago. It made the news. So when Methuselah dies with a name like he had, I'm sure word got around.
So there was somebody who was 122 years old or something?
Yeah. I think a lady in Italy.
Oh. Yeah, I wonder how people treated Methuselah when he was a little kid.
A little kid?
Yeah, like, what does your name mean? Why? What ends?
Yeah, definitely not the name that we would all want to have. And do you know anybody named Methuselah today? I've never met a Methuselah.
Probably no more people named Lucifer.
That's true. So, Methuselah probably no doubt helped Noah with the ark, and probably so did Noah's dad, Lamech. But, well, I have to do the math on when Lamech died. I know he died before Methuselah. But Noah spent actually, well, yeah, here's a good question. How long do you think Noah spent building the ark?
A year? 5 years? I actually don't remember right now.
It's actually, the Bible doesn't give the exact numbers, but in Genesis 6, it talks about how God shows up and he says, I'm not going to contend with man forever, and his days will be 120. And a lot of people think that means, God's going to shorten the lifespan of humans to 120 years. But actually, in the full context of that chapter, it really makes sense that God gave 120 years of warning to the antediluvians to turn the lives around and prepare to get on the ark.
Wait, 120? What?
Yeah.
That's like so much time.
Yeah, exactly. Lots of warning. And Noah probably started building the ark before he had kids. And it says he started having the kids when he was 500 years old. That's when he had Shem. And then the ark started when Noah was 600.
Wow.
It's like a family business. Hey, kids, you grow up your whole life seeing what your dad's building, and then one day you get to help along. And,
yeah. and you can imagine, like, all your friends, like, you're at school and they're laughing at you. Oh, are you the kid of that crazy guy Noah who says it's going to rain even though it's never ever going to rain, or it's never rained, and building this gigantic boat in the middle of land where there's no water? So they probably took a lot of abuse, verbal abuse as kids. Huh. Yeah. Oh, was that Noah there? I think that's Noah, the man himself.
The her. He's turned into a her.
Paparazzi.
And next time we'll find out why villagers go. The Bible actually tells us. So we know the story doesn't end with just Noah and his family. They don't die out. They fulfill God's promise, or God's request, that they go unto all the world and fill it. So Noah had he had 3 kids, and they had 3 wives. Each one had 1 wife. And then they each had many, 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 many kids. And then they spread out to the entire earth. And, for example, we come here to the land of Uz, or this way, land of Uz. Who was in Uz?
The wizard?
The Wizard of Uz? Good guess. Who else?
Joe?
Yep, Job. So
Oh,
if we'll find Job's house that way, maybe. We haven't built it yet.
well, it got torn down by a great wind.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Still under construction. The new one. And we're off to Mesopotamia, where lots of descendants of Noah came and settled in the early years of the expansion. What was that, Andrew?
Yep, lots of people.
Lots of people.
Exponential.
And then we come to this guy. Nimrod. Would you like to read that little verse there about him?
Yep. Genesis 10, verses 1, 6, 8 through 12. These are the family records of Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. They also had sons after the flood. Ham's sons Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. Cush who began to be powerful in the land. There we go. He was a powerful hunter in the sight of the Lord. This is why it is said, like Nimrod, a powerful hunter in the sight of the Lord. His kingdom started with Babylon, Erech, Akkad, Calneh, in the land of Shinar. From that land he went to Assyria and built Nineveh, Rehoboth-er, Calah, and Resen, between Nineveh and the great city Calah. I've never been to any of those places.
You don't get around much, do you?
No, quarantine life.
So this actually is a recreation of what archaeology has showed us some of these homes look like back in Mesopotamia and early back in those days. And apparently they would build 4 walls and access was at times through the roof. Isn't that crazy?
I would imagine, though, that it was a way to keep out the elements.
And other people. Only one way to access.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Easily defendable.
Oh. Very simple life. Just some mats, place to cook some food, some objects, thatched roof.
Thatched roof cottages. 10 points for anybody who had said that once.
And you know what's interesting is we're seeing cities, and did we read the part where Nimrod is forming cities, but God said, I want you to go spread out and fill the whole earth. So the Bible just has this interesting pattern of usually someone bad goes and builds a city. Do you know someone else who, as soon as he does something really horrible, says he then leaves and builds a city?
Cain.
Yeah, exactly. So Cain murders, and immediately he goes and forms a city. And so, in some ways, it gets Nimrod is kind of this second Cain that brings back people really just pooling together in big communities and then doing farming, which is, I mean, in of itself, the community farming isn't bad, but you then start having structured societies where then you have some people are the farmers and then other people do absolutely nothing related to the earth, and they are, you know, the lawyers, they're the doctors, they're the teachers, the soldiers, and people become more and more cut off from the earth.
Lawyers? Why would anybody want to be a lawyer?
Yeah, for real.
All these specialized occupations.
Exactly. And eventually, the way society goes is then society gets even more proud, more boastful, wants to outdo other societies and make names for themselves. And I think I'm just setting the story for maybe next time.
Yeah, we're at an hour right now.
Yeah. So we'll continue this story next time and talk about where it goes, where civilization building ends up, and God's reaction to it. So want to thank you all for joining us. If you have questions, drop them in the chat. And join us in the guild. And maybe, Andrew, you can give us that information again, how they can connect with us and find more about the awesome builds we're doing in the future.
Andy's muted.
Oh, no.
Yeah, join us at oneaccordtheguild.com. You can join our Discord, which we would really like you to do. We've got quite a vast amount of different gamers and creative people that hang out there, which is just a really nice, safe space to just hang out. So definitely come join us. And you can also follow us on all of our social media if you go to our website at oneaccordtheguild.com.
Bye-bye.